Hi guys, it's Kelly Latevola here and I'm back with another video for Neat and Tangled. Today we're going to be using the No Word stamp set, the Friendly Florals, the Magnolia stamp set, and then the Floral Heart. So the Floral Heart is kind of the focus. This was a stamp set that came out when I first started working for Neat and Tangled, and I really love the whole design, but I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. Like I wanted there to be more of it. So we're going to be talking about kind of expanding our stamps and combining stamp sets today. So I have a horizontal card panel here. This is Nina 80-pound solar white cardstock. And then I'm stamping in Gina K amalgam ink. This is Copic safe because I'm going to be doing Copic coloring. So I'm inking this up nice and good, and then I'm going to stamp it in the center of that cardstock because I'm going to be building out around it. I want my sentiment to be in the center so that it is the focal point. And then I'm going to mask this. So this is Eclipse masking paper. That tends to be my go-to. I have another one that I like as well. That's the 3M masking tape, but that one the ink doesn't settle into, so you kind of have to be careful with it because you can smudge it. So here I've taken one of the larger flowers from the Friendly Florals, and when anytime you're building a wreath, it's important to have symmetry. Or any floral bouquet, like symmetry is extremely important. So I'm going to make this really easy on myself. Whatever I do to the right, I'm going to do to the left. There'll be later on when we look at filling things in, because this particular stamp has like a branch on the left hand side and some leaves on the right hand side. It's not going to be exact, but the weight of it will be the same. So even though it isn't precisely the same image, the weight of it is, because when the illustrator was drawing it, obviously they were looking for the same thing, that symmetry, that balance. So here I'm putting down some masks. And yes, I cut each one of those little teeny tiny leaf masks. I actually only had to move them like twice. So here I've picked some of the stamps from the Magnolia, and then also this same flower that I used before, and I'm going to put that in the center of the heart on the top. I'm filling in this little Magnolia on the right hand side and on the bottom, and then I'm also going to put that on the left hand side. In this stamp set, there are magnolias that are drawn veering to the left and veering to the right, even though they're kind of like the same bloom. So that made this super easy for me because I could stamp one on the right and then one on the left, and they were going to look correct, like their presentation or their angle would look correct. Here's where I'm moving those little tiny leaves again. Just to make sure that I don't get my Magnolia on it. You'll notice that the Magnolia stamp sets, the line weight is different. It's a thicker line, but don't worry, there's a way to fix that when we get to the end of it. We're going to make it all look cohesive and like it was meant to be one stamp. I always have liked looking at my stamp sets differently. I've always liked being able to stretch them and get more, for my investment. There's also a little branch with like some little tiny flowers. They almost look like little tulips, little buds, in the Friendly Floral set. And I'm going to use those to fill in the areas at the top, because it wasn't a big enough area to justify another flower, but it did definitely need something so that the balance would be the same. I'm just moving those leaves one more time. That'll be the last time I move them. I'm going to stamp that branch on this side. And as I'm going through, I'm kind of masking as I go, to make sure that I'm not going to stamp over any of the other images because this is a 1-layer card. Now, all of these items have dies. So if you would rather do that, if you would rather use die cuts, that's totally an option. And then you would just build them around each other versus stamping them around each other. I added a little branch on the left-hand side, just because I felt like that spot was a little sparse. And then I'm also going to do that over here, on the right-hand side where that branch is, because I was worried there wasn't going to be enough greenery on that side since that's where the branch is on the other image. So then after that, I moved the branch. I did stamp it twice, because on the left hand side, those leaves stick up a little bit higher. So, looking for that balance. And now I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of the masks so you can see the full image. It still clearly looks like a heart. It's just a little bit more weighty, a little bit bulkier, and it's something that isn't going to look like everybody else's cards because I've made it myself. I started by picking out a color scheme, and so I liked the blue violets. The opposite of the blue violet is the yellow orange, and then from there I went to the triangle of that pinky peach color, and then after those were like my three main colors for my flowers, and then after that I started adding in some blue greens and greens and found just the color combination that I am looking for. Just wanted to explain that part because I know sometimes a lot of people have difficulty with color theory or picking out colors that work well together. In order to, because it does look a little bit busy. And I think sometimes that can be really overwhelming for people because there's a lot of pieces, parts to the images, and then they get really overwhelmed by what they should color first, and then they just maybe don't color it at all. So what I decided to do, and what I usually do, and it makes it easier on me so that my brain can pair those things, I just start with the lightest color of the whatever I'm going to use. So for the blue violets, I started with the lightest one of that. For the peachy pink color, I started with the lightest one of that. And all I'm doing is going in and just putting down one layer of color for where I want them to be. Here you will notice that this is not a Copic marker. It's not a Copic marker. It is an Altenew marker, and I will link to that, what set that came out of. This is the closest one that I could find to a BG11. Because my marker seems to have gone missing. I went to a retreat a couple weekends ago and everybody kind of like share and share alike. And I just think that somehow it went home with a new family and it didn't come back here, which is okay. It happens. I certainly don't think that it was any kind of intentional. So I have ordered a new BG11 and I am waiting for it to come to my home so that I have it. But in the meantime, this is a perfectly acceptable replacement for that. So now I'm going to go in and just start adding my shading. I typically work from the lightest color to the darkest color, darkest back out to my lightest, because I want this to be a more springtime feeling of a card, more pastel-like. I'm not going to add a huge amount of the darker colors, just enough to give me some dimension. And the reason that I want it to be more pastel-like is because this is actually a card for a friend of mine who has lost her husband. So he passed away like a week ago, and I was going to go to the memorial service. They didn't do a wake or a funeral that was open to the public. They just did a memorial service. And so I wanted to obviously give her a card to convey my sympathies to her and let her know she was in my prayers. And so I wanted this to be a little bit more pastel. I knew she would appreciate the flowers, the florals, just because I know her. But yeah, so I just wanted it to be a little bit softer. You could make this whatever color works for you. So yeah, so we don't work together anymore, but I knew her from work. She actually trained me so most of you guys know, was a 911 dispatcher, police, fire, EMS, for about 10 years. And I got hired there when I was 20. Had no idea what I was doing. I actually ended up with the job because a girl that I was friends with from high school, we were both looking for jobs, and she was dating this guy who was a cop, and he said they were hiring dispatchers. And so she tells me, and I was like, I can't do that job. Like, they talk in codes and stuff. And he was like, nope, it's all plain language. And I was already going for criminal justice. And so I started applying for dispatch jobs, and pretty much everywhere that I applied to already had a part-timer that was going to move into a full-time spot, or they just weren't interested in hiring anybody that didn't have any experience, which now, after having done it for so long, I totally get that. But my city decided to go ahead and take a chance on me, even though I had no experience and I was pretty young. And at the time, we didn't have any dispatchers. So we had 3 full-timers and 1 part-timer, and basically 2 of the full-timers were just working 12s. Like they were just trying to make do in the department with what they had. So they hired me with another woman. The other woman that I got hired with didn't make it. She didn't make it through training. She ended up just quitting. And I remember going through training with Mary, is her name. And I absolutely abhorred working with Mary. I could not stand working with her because so you have steps. That's basically how our program works. And step one, like you have 2 weeks where you pretty much shadow and you don't really do anything. Then step one, you should be doing 25% of the work. Step two, you should be doing 50% of the work. Step three, 75% of the work. And then step four, you should be pretty much doing everything on your own. And then you have another shadow period where this time they're watching you do everything. It's kind of how the whole process works. Takes about 4 months. I got out of training in about 4 months. Not everybody gets out in that amount of time. If you need extra, like they, will give you time, all of those things. So, but I did not like working with Mary because I was in step two where I should have been doing 50% of the work. And we had an island in the middle. So you'd have dispatch one, which was a seat, the computer, the radio, and then you had dispatch two, seat, computer, radio. And there was an island in between. And she would sit at the island and basically just watch me run my butt off. I would be from the phones to the radios to the phones, back and forth. And I was only supposed to be doing 50% of the work. And I remember complaining to my then boyfriend at the time. I was like, what is she doing? I don't even understand. It's like she's there and doesn't want to do anything. Like, is she lazy? Is it like, what is it? And then after I made it through all of the training and was on my own, and I had my first really busy night. And where I worked, you dispatched alone. You didn't have a partner. So it was just all you. If the phone rang, it was you. If an officer called on the radio, it was you. 911 rang, it was you. Didn't matter what, people coming into the lobby, it was you. And so I remember my first very busy night where it was just like totally slammed. We were running all night long. And on my way home, I remember thinking, like, that's why she did it. She showed me I could do it. And I was doing it in step two, but she never like coddled me. It was a sink or swim kind of thing. And even though I didn't like working with her when I was in training, she was probably one of the best trainers that I had, because she just let me out there and was like, you got it, you can do it, you don't need to lean on me. And so I grew an appreciation for that. And then at other things in my life, with parenting and things like that, I certainly have applied that rule where sometimes you have to step back and let them kind of sink or swim so that they know that they can do it. Because if you just helicopter all the time, they don't gain any confidence in themselves. And so that's what she gave me. She gave me the confidence in myself to be able to do the job. So yeah, very, very grateful to her. So the coloring was pretty much done. Went through and added some accents with my little white gel pen to the larger flowers. And now, just to give it a little bit more presence on the card, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to outline it with a very light blue marker. Used to do this all the time, recently got back into the habit of it. And, I'm not mad about it. I really like it. I think that it does add something to the card. So I'm just going to go through and outline all of those things. Normally I would do this with my BG11. That's normally my go-to color, but because I didn't have any other like blue in this card, I decided that I would go with the blue, so that way the leaves that were colored with the blue greens would stand out from this color in the background. But if I didn't have a blue green in the bouquet, I would for sure use the BG11. BG10 is also a similar color, so if you have that, don't feel like you need to rush out and buy the 11. They're pretty close. So once the outside was done, then just going to go through and do the inside. Outside of a shadow, that's going to be the only thing that I put on the inside. Like I said, I wanted my sentiment to go right across the middle of that heart and kind of be the focal point. This is just the pretty little frame around it. The sentiment for me on this card is what really matters, just so that she knows she's in my prayers. So I outlined all of that. Now, it did feel a little, I guess, a little stark against the white. I know it's hard to tell on camera, but then I'm going to go in with another, this is a B0000, so quadruple zero. And this is just going to blend it out into that white really, really nicely. So when I'm going around the first blue color, I'm not covering the entire thing. I'm just kind of hitting the edges of it so that those colors blend in together a little bit more. I'm also going to add a drop shadow. If you have not watched my videos before, I color everything as if my light source is in the top right-hand corner. Most of the coloring that I did on this wreath was a center highlight, meaning I wasn't really paying too much attention to the light source, but for this, I'm going to. So you see when I hold the marker up there, the shadow is cast down and to the left. So that is how I'm going to add my shadow. And shadows are a little bit tricky. So if the light source is on the right, then the shadow will be on the left. If the light source is in the top right, your shadows will be in the bottom left. Transversely, if you are a person who likes to color with their light source in the top left, then the shadows would be in the bottom right. So it just depends on what you are comfortable with. For me, that's how they taught me when I was in my one and only high school art class, and so it's just kind of stayed with me since then. I chose a C3 because it was relatively light. I didn't want anything that was going to be too dark or heavy on this particular card, just enough to give it a little bit of dimension and kind of help it pop off of the background. So nothing real dramatic, just a nice subtle shadow. So adding that. And then for my sentiment, I decided, oh, I have to outline. Like I would forget to put in the bold black outline. This is where we're going to change that line width so they look like they belong together. Normally when I am doing my outlining, oh, and somebody had asked me recently where I got my EK Success journaling pens. The last pack, I used to get them at Michael's. They don't sell them anymore. So the last 2 packs, I ordered them off of Amazon, and I get the 5-pack, just so you know, FYI on that. But back to the line width. Normally I do a 3.5, a 0.35. When I did that particular outline, I bumped it up to a 4.5. So not so that the line width was so thick that it didn't look soft or feminine, but thick enough that it helped blend in the Magnolia since the line widths were so different. For the sentiment, I am using black Simon Says cardstock. I treated that with my embossing tool, and then I'm inking out my sentiment with Versamark. While I'm doing all of this, I have my heat tool heating up, so that way I don't have to put it on the paper for a ton of time so it doesn't warp or anything like that. I did end up stamping this twice because it was the first time I had used this stamp and it wasn't really seasoned. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way. I'm going to bring in that white embossing powder and sprinkle that on. A little tip trick that Laura Basson taught me was that if you have any little teeny tiny areas that have embossing powder that you don't want, is to use this craft pick, this Tim Holtz craft pick, to get rid of it. And this actually works really, really well to get the little teeny tiny parts off. So if you have one of those, I would recommend using that. Then I'm going to go ahead and heat set it. Because it's already been heating up, it's only just going to take a second, but you want to make sure that you wait until it's all melted and completely smooth. I trimmed that down into a just a little label shape. I'm going to pop that up with some Scotch foam tape right in the center here. And I'm just going to like scooch it around until I make sure that it's centered and then push that down. The last thing that I did was add a little bit of shimmer because that's how I roll on the flowers, just the flowers. So whether they were big or little, they got some glitter on them. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So I hope you guys learned a little bit something about combining your stamp sets or making an image, a little bit larger. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I will catch you on the next video. Bye.